today we have the privilege of interviewing the Hortons. They're missionaries to Brazil, and they're going to share a little bit more about their ministry. We have a few questions that we'd love to ask them as well. So welcome, Brother and Mrs. Horton. So glad that you guys could be with us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So you guys are second generation missionaries, and tell us a little bit of how long you've been on the field, as well as how long that Liberty has supported you guys.
Okay, we've been missionaries ourselves for 27 years. Of course, I grew up on the mission field, and Antonia, she was saved in the first church that my parents started as missionaries, and so she's Brazilian.
Yeah.
But we've been missionaries ourselves for 27, and I believe that that Liberty has been supporting us since the year 99.
Okay.
I believe so. It's been quite a while.
Yeah, 22 years. That's incredible. So we love missionaries, and it's incredible being able to support and see what God is doing on the mission field. In fact, God's done some great things through, I know, your guys' ministry over the course of 26 years. I mean, God's done some incredible things. As you think about what God has done, does your mind kind of focus in on a few different things specifically that comes to mind that of great things that God has done? Could you share with us maybe one or two things that would come to mind?
Sure. Well, first of all, just us being able to be on the field and being able to go back to a country where I already knew the language, I was an answer from God, because I surrendered to be a missionary and preach. And God could have sent me anywhere.
Yeah.
But he allowed me to go back. And so that was a blessing. And, God has used us to plant churches there in Brazil, and we're thankful for that. But one of the greatest blessings I believe that God has allowed us to do, that was just kind of completely out of my mind and plans, was during our last term on the field, a lady came to our camp and she got saved, and she lived on an island. In the Amazon, and she came to us, and she was at our camp, and so she came to me and she said, I would like very much for someone to come and start a work on our island. And I said, well, we don't have an island ministry, but hey, I get seasick anytime I get on a boat.
Yeah,
I get seasick. I don't know how this is going to work, because the Amazon is like an ocean. It's waves, and so we started going over there, and we were over there for almost a year, and it's a miracle, because first of all, we got a work started with children, a really incredible Bible club over there, and all during that time, I never got seasick one time. It was amazing.
That's awesome. What kind of camp was it? So you guys had a camp. Share with us a little bit about, for folks that don't know a little bit about your ministry, what kind of camps do you guys host there?
Okay, our camp, we own our own camp land, and so we have dorms and everything, and we have a camps in July. We have camps for children, for a juniors and senior camp.
Yeah.
And then we also have camps in February for families, which is during retreat time. It's during the Brazilian carnival time. Yeah.
Okay, that's neat. So really, you can facilitate a camp any part of the year, because you have the facilities to do that.
Oh,
that's incredible.
It's a blessing to have it.
All right, so Mrs. Horton, I got to ask you a question here. So you're a native of Brazil, and you and your husband kind of met. You kind of led to the Lord through one of the works there. How did you guys meet? I'm very interested.
Well, I can't remember, because I was only 4 and he was
7.
Wow.
So I know that his parents, they went to my hometown to start a church. And
Gotcha.
And the first person to get saved in that ministry was my sister.
Okay.
One of my sisters. I have a big family.
Yeah.
And then one by one of my family got saved through his ministry.
Wow.
So I don't remember the day that we met, but that's how we met.
Oh, that's cool.
It was not an arranged marriage, though.
The thought didn't cross my mind at all.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool, though, to be able to minister to people, and God kind of leads you to a spouse. Sometimes folks wonder, can God use me? Or, I'm a single individual. I mean, is there somebody out there for me? But you were just doing really the Lord's work. And through that, God led you to your wife. And what an incredible story. Well, Mrs. Horton, I want to ask you a question. What is one thing that we can pray for your guys' ministry about? I know that with camp ministry, reaching other folks, I mean, your guys' concentration is in so many different areas, but what could we pray for your family about? Maybe let's give maybe two things, and then Brother Horton, if you'd like to chime in as well, maybe with one or two things, we'd love to pray for those things with you.
Okay. First of all, I have a niece.
Mm-hmm.
She's 39 years old. She has two little kids, and got is just been 2 months now. She got stage 4 cancer, and it's very bad. And if you pray for her, her name is Alcione. And also, the second church that we started, they are going through some hard time right now.
Okay.
So if you can pray for the second church that we started.
Absolutely. We'll be praying for those things. Okay. And then Brother Horton, anything that we could pray for you comes to mind about your guys' ministry as well?
Well, pray for our daughter, Stacy. She's actually on her way to Brazil now. She left this morning, and she's going down to help Alcione and take care of her.
Okay.
And Stacy's having some very challenging times in her life right now in her walk with the Lord. And as a family, that's a missionary's family is central to him being able to minister.
Yeah.
And so y'all pray for Stacy.
Yeah.
And I would ask that you pray that God will give us direction in our next term. We're going back on June 24th, and we're not really, we're between works. And so we're waiting for God to open a door to send us to the right place for us to start another church.
Yeah.
And so that you could pray about that.
We'll pray for those two things. Now, you brought up a very interesting thing. I mean, really the transition that's happened over the last few months, and even we could probably say year with the pandemic and stuff. Sometimes as you have this idea of what God's doing, sometimes God can just change that quickly. I mean, it could just change almost immediately, almost like if it's a pivot point, you're headed in one direction, God says, no, kind of closes that door and says, I want you to go this way. I think you have a little bit of insight with this, but I'd love for you to share with our people, because I'm sure I know that our people are probably going through similar things, though they may not necessarily be going to Brazil. They're still in the mission field. And I would love for you to speak into that topic of when God changes our view, how and what can we do? Would you be able to elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yes, sure. I appreciate that. I've always been the type of person to like to be in control of my circumstances. And in the last few months, God has shown me just how much I'm not in control. We had this situation come up with our family. Our daughter, she called us and she asked for us to come home from Arizona. We were actually going out to visit you folks out there in January, and we had to immediately come back home and take care of this family situation. And then I got a call from our church plant down there on the same day that I got a call from our daughter. I got a call from our church plant saying that the pastor had to step down and they don't have a pastor. And so they needed me to kind of take control from here and help them. And I wasn't there to be able to help them, of course. And then we found out about our niece. And so all these things just kind of broadsided us. And we were on our way out to Arizona doing the work that God's given us to do, to report and to preach. And all of a sudden our plans were all messed up. And so, I was thinking about, how God's word is full of people whose plans God changes. He changed Joseph and Mary's plans. He changed, and aren't you thankful for that? And then he changed Paul's plans. And I was thinking about, in Acts chapter 16, Paul was on his way to Asia to preach. He was doing what God called him to do. And then it says in verse 6, now when they had gone throughout Phrygia and the region of Galatia and were forbidden of the Holy Ghost to preach the word in Asia, after they were come to Mysia, they essayed to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit suffered them not. I mean, Paul was going to preach. He was on his way to preach, and God didn't let him go to Asia. And we read on in that passage, and we learn that Paul ended up going to Troas. He received a vision that we call the Macedonian call. And from there, he went over into Macedonia, which is what we call Europe today, to preach over there. And Paul wasn't doing anything wrong when God changed his plans. He was doing what God called him to do, but God sent him in a different direction. And during the days that it took him to travel, because he didn't travel by airfare, or he didn't have a car. So during those days, I imagine it was going through Paul's mind, what is God doing? Why is God not allowing me to preach to the Asians? Why do I have to go over here? And I learned some things that were very important for us. I learned some lessons that were very important to us, and it really has helped us make it through this time. First of all, that we have to recognize that this is God's kingdom and not ours. We need to recognize God's authority in our lives, and the way that we do that is first by listening to him. Paul was always in sync with God's will and listening to God's voice, and we need to also wait on the Lord. Paul had plenty of time to wait. He was on the road a lot, and when he passed over into Macedonia, he ended up in jail. And so he had to, there in Philippi, he had to wait on the Lord while he was in jail. But then we also recognize that Paul, he obeyed God. When God did reveal his will, he obeyed. In verse 10, there it says, and after he had seen the vision, immediately we endeavored to go into Macedonia, assuredly gathering that the Lord had called us for to preach the gospel unto them. And so, part of recognizing God's kingdom is being willing to listen, to wait, but also to obey when God opens the doors. We have to remember that this is his kingdom. And then we also have to recognize, folks, we have to recognize not only God's authority and his kingdom, we also have to recognize his wisdom. God knows best what is best for us. And God has better timing. He has better plans for us, and we don't always understand it, but he is wise. And if you in Paul's life, we recognize that once he went down to Troas, he ended up going into Macedonia, and there the gospel went to Europe. I mean, God is wise. If I'm a descendant of Europeans, most of us are. And so we look back on what God did in Paul's life, and we can see that God truly was wise, because instead of going to Asia, he went to Europe, and eventually the gospel got to us because he obeyed God and went over, and God showed just how wise he was. And the way that we get wisdom is by obeying God and listening to him. So we need to recognize that God is wise. And listen, I don't know what God's going to do with our family right now. I don't know exactly where he's going to take us next in our ministry. I know it's going to be in Brazil, but I don't know what town, what city. But I've learned to trust in God's wisdom. And then last of all, and this is so important, we need to recognize God's goodness, his authority, his wisdom, and his goodness. God changes our plans if he doesn't have something good planned for us. And that's hard for us to recognize, but God is really good. Look what God did in Paul's life. He gave Paul a doctor named Luke, who accompanied him for the rest of his life. And if Paul had not gone down to Troas, Luke would not have joined the company. So God gave Paul a doctor, and Luke went on to write the book of Acts, and as well as the book of Luke. And Paul, time and time again, he found out that God was so good. Later on, Paul was able to go to Asia and start churches there, and Paul was able to minister, but it was all in God's timing, because God is so good. And then God gave Paul a really incredible mission church there in Philippi, one of the churches that was so faithful to Paul even during difficult times. And that would not have happened if Paul had not gone to Europe. And so we need to learn to trust in God's goodness. And folks, I'm amazed day after day at God's goodness in our lives.
Yeah.
And that's something that God has really taught us.
That's incredible. I love the different things that you said there. As far as God's kingdom, it's not our kingdom. Sometimes, and I would very much be just being very transparent with you. I'm very much the same way. I love to be able to be in control, because whenever I'm in control, I can dictate, and I have the capabilities of knowing what's going to happen. But that uncertainty is very challenging. But realizing there's someone greater than me that is in charge gives me the assurance of realizing, look, it's okay, whatever happens. And then realizing God's wisdom. So the understanding, okay, it's not my kingdom, it's God's kingdom. Then God's wisdom, there's an action. I'm doing some things, I'm obeying, I'm listening, I'm waiting. And then God's goodness. I absolutely love that, because if things don't turn out our way, it's all about perspective. It's so you have two people in the same situation, but yet one thrives. Why? Because of how they see the circumstance and the situation to better them, as the other person just sees, well, man, this if this wouldn't have happened. And man, looking at God's perspective and God's goodness, he provided resources in addition to what you said, or to add to what you said. And that is so valuable. I love how that you shared these thoughts with us, and we're so very thankful.
I really enjoyed this interview with the Hortons, but I know that we can impact their lives by praying for them personally.